Welcome to The Dirt, an economics podcast bringing you the down and dirty agronomic science behind growing better crops and bigger returns. Backed by Nutrien-economics.com, we break down the latest research, news, and insights to help farmers make better business decisions. Let's dig in.
Hello and welcome back to The Dirt podcast. Thanks for tuning in this week. I am your host, Amy Crozier, National Senior Marketing Representative with Nutrien. Joining me today is two experts excited to talk about cost of production with grain. We have Eric Olson, the National Leader of Farm Management Consulting with MMP. And as well, we have Warren Bills, National Leader of Agronomic Services with MMP. Thank you both for being here. I'm really excited to tackle this topic, not just from an agronomic perspective or a farm management perspective. And so I'd like you to just start off with our listeners. One is just tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and what each of you do for MMP. So Eric, why don't we kick off with you, the farm management perspective, and then we'll kick off to Warren.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Amy. So my role with MNP is I was one of the first Aggies that we hired in an accounting firm. So I've been here for about 28 years. My background is I grew up on a farm in central Manitoba. I have a degree in agriculture, economics, worked in finance for 10 years, and then moved over to MNP. So our role in our group is to basically work financial modeling and financial consulting with our farm clients and help them make good decisions and be profitable.
Awesome. What about you, Warren?
I have a role within MNP as the lead of our agronomy services. It's a relatively new service line inside of the firm. We help farms grow healthy crops, and that's essentially the way I summarize my career as well. I also come from a grain farm up kind of more northeastern Alberta. I have a degree in agronomy, spent my time focused on largely the technology and the data and that helps farms enable these healthy crops, alongside of this, the science of the soil and the plants. So now I'm doing the same thing, getting to lead a team of amazing people out in the field, boots on the ground, right alongside Eric and his team. And I think we've got a kind of 1-2 punch here in the market. It's been good.
One reason I was really excited to have you both on, one is you have an agricultural background, but two is we talk a lot about cost of production, and MMP really is a specialist in having grain cost of reductions, dairy cost of reductions, and really digs into the overall farm management, not just from a management perspective, but also layers it into those practical agronomic practices that you can do out in the fields. How should growers think about cost of production when it comes to grain?
Maybe I'll start off and talk a little bit about a big part of the work that we've shifted into is benchmarking and breaking down clients' financial statements and really on the income side. So, the first piece, every farm loves to talk about gross margin, which is their production expenses minus their gross income. And when we fall back onto Warren, I'll let Warren speak to that a bit more. That's where Warren's crew is real experts in, is trying to get the most out of every acre. But the other pieces that farmers don't talk about as much is we break it down to, we call the next piece, we would look at labor, power, and machinery per acre. So how much does it cost for you to go out there and actually put the crop in with your equipment, your labor? Those really relate to acres, and they go up and down with acres. And they also look at, those are decisions you're making on terms of your equipment, your fleet, in terms of how you hire people, machinery expenses. The last one's land, building, and finance, which is really your cost of owning your assets. Most of the time, that's land and buildings. And we look at those costs too. And so what that allows us to do is farmers work in a we would say a perfectly competitive market. They compete against each other for different things, but really they're in a low cost business. So those are the costs that they don't often think of. If you ask a farmer what his gross margin is on wheat, he can tell you. Ask him how much he's spending on equipment. No, not that sure. So we're just trying to bring those numbers to light to help clients maybe make better decisions as they move forward. And again, those fixed costs that we talk about, those other costs, they stay with you for a long time. So it's important to understand how to manage those.
The coolest thing about this combination we have in MNP is the vocabulary and the way that Eric describes kind of cost of production is such a mature and personalized way that these farms need to understand. Because when you ask that same question, oh, what does cost of production mean to you? Why is it important? My career has been spent really understanding that grain farmers, and this isn't meant to be a criticism, actually don't know their cost of production. When I talk with dairy farmers, hog guys, bird guys, they know it down to the cent, the liter, the egg, the head. And so when I think of the cost of production from a growing a crop standpoint, our cycle is, this is oversimplified. We grow the crop, we sell the crop, we manage the money. If we don't know what it costs us to grow that crop, then why would we go to market to try to sell it, not knowing if we're going to make any money? And so understanding, our cost of production on a per bushel basis by crop type would be super helpful. And farms are getting there. It's not that they haven't been there, but I know early on in my career, I spent a lot of time talking about yields and nitrogen and chemicals and soil tests, and we grew healthy crops, but the profitability wasn't understood until the financial statements were delivered, and that's simply not fair. We need to plan how to grow cost of production at a point where there is margin to talk.
That's a good point. So I think a good starting point, though, is really what is cost of production and what does that mean to a grower? We talk about there is the overhead cost of our land and our machinery and our equipment. And I know when we go to a trade show, the first thing that we're drawn to is machinery and what's new, what's exciting. It's this fun part of the farm. And then the other part is the agronomic part of when we're buying our inputs. And so when we think overall on the farm, from a whole strategy projection, what is cost of production to a farmer?
Maybe I'll start by talking about, you talked about equipment. I grew up on a farm and I like going to farm shows, and I love looking at the big cool stuff that's coming out. And there's some real innovative technologies coming out. But what we think is important for clients to do, and we're really scratching the surface at M&P, but we think farmers should understand their cost. I go back to that labor, power, machinery number, but they need to understand their cost to operate and own that equipment on a per acre basis. Mm-hmm. So it has to be a number. It can't be a percentage. It can't be, hey, if I buy this combine, I'm going to gain this efficiency on my grain or on my fuel. I'm going to hire one less person. It has to come down to a per acre. And over the last 5 years, we've seen that cost go up by almost $50 an acre. I just looked at some numbers today about our South Sask, just as an example, our benchmark, $168 an acre. Our best clients are putting towards that labor, power, machinery side. So from every acre, they need to make that much right off the bat to pay for that. Mm-hmm. And the reason that number is important, Amy, the way we look at it, is if you understand that number, you can start measuring it and you can start making decisions. So we have producers now that we work quite closely with that will go, okay, I'm going to make this decision. I'm going to buy this piece of machinery. How does that affect that number? How does that affect my overall profitability? But really, okay, so I know that number is going to bounce for 2 years. I can live with that because over the next 5 years, it's going to end up a little bit lower or the same. So again, I always say this to everyone, farmers are smart. They understand how to manage things. They just need to be given the tools. And this is a bit innovative what we're doing by giving them those tools to try to say, hey, let's take a hard look at that. And before that, lots of clients would just say, well, it's just the cost of doing business. I don't know. And we'll see what it looks like at the end of the day. So that's why I think those numbers are really important.
Warren?
Yeah, I'd add to who doesn't love equipment. And I think there's a nice, healthy tension on these decisions between the argument that this equipment, as it continues to advance, there's technologies, there's sensors, there's different placement methods that an agronomist can say, you know what, I think I can get you more bushels if you had this particular piece of equipment. So there's a costing side of that decision, and Eric and his team are going to say, hey, it's, from a cash flow standpoint and managing these ratios, it might not make sense. But then if we talk about the revenue side, and we truly believe and have data that shows that certain equipment technology can increase, how many bushels you produce, then the decision can be made a little bit more holistically. And it's not just about the cost, but it's the opportunity that can be gained. So, there's no brainer technology like swath control and sectional control that really reduces that overlap and those costs. Now we're getting into, really, really dialing in some of that work. And to Eric's point, understanding it cost per acre is the best way to kind of get on the same playing field, and know if that big $1.2 million combine, it might actually make sense. Acres per hour, cost per acre, all that kind of stuff. But you got to do the work other than just, oh, that looks really shiny and nice, and I like the new seat.
So Amy, we were just as an example, I was talking to a client this morning and they went to 50-foot headers on their combines. They're a larger grain farm. And we looked at their benchmark numbers and they're actually dropped their fuel by $5 an acre.
Uh-huh.
Now, a big chunk of that, some of that is around what they've done different on their equipment, and we could quantify that. And I'm not here to sell big equipment. That wasn't my goal, but lots of times people get told this is what it's going to do. Well, we're the ones that are going to test it afterwards, because really those are the numbers that matter, that end up, that's your numbers, and that's how you compete against your next piece of dirt. If you're the most efficient, you're buying the next piece of dirt and you're outbidding your neighbor because they can't afford to bid as much as you. And margins are tightening. So it's important to start looking at this. $22 canola, it didn't matter as much, but today it does.
Yeah, and there's a lot of volatility in the market, and there's a lot of costs that have changed. So what do you see as the biggest cost drivers and the biggest impacts on cost of production that have changed over the last few years?
Surprisingly, and we look at the land building and finance piece, I want to start there because that's really your cost of, we talk about land prices going up. We haven't seen it go up a lot. Like if we do a benchmark, it's gone up about $12 an acre. So what that tells me is that farmers, now there's, depending where you are in your investment cycle, younger farmers are going to be carrying more debt. But what that told me is as farmers made profit, they invested it back into their operations. They just go out and borrow more money. So our good farmers are making real smart decisions. And generally, I always go back to this when I do lots of presentations to clients. Farmers are they're pretty good business people. Right? They've been doing this for a while. So that says that, hey, that trend, it's still going up, but not as fast as the other ones. The biggest cost driver, and I'm going to go back to, is that, the labor power and machinery. Like the cost of machinery is not going down, and we're seeing that really, really pushing farms. And it's tough because you go in to buy that next piece of machinery, and so I've been in the business for a long time. There was a day where a $200,000 combine, you went, oh my gosh. Well, now you're probably buying the header for that, right? So it's a different discussion. That's the big driver that's gone up. Those production expenses, I want to go back to production expenses and gross income. That goes back to Warren's crew, right? On our agronomy side, what's fertilizer going to be next spring? I'm not sure, right? It sounds like it might go down, it might go up. I can guarantee it, I don't know. And if someone tells you they know, I wouldn't believe them. Those get managed by our crew every year, right? Again, I go back to those more fixed costs. You got to live with them for a long time before you can start making that adjustment. But again, measuring it does help. But that's the one big cost that we've seen that's probably affecting producers more than anything, is just their cost of machinery and labor.
It's funny, I was digging out some old boxes and found a ledger from 1947 from my grandpa's farm. And I've carried it around the last few weeks at some meetings we've had. And I was thumbing through the ledger, and there was a cockshut self-propelled combine bought in 1946 for $3,800. And I was riding with one of our farm management consultants, and he said, I think my grandpa had a cockshut and he found the picture. And so we were laughing, and I don't know what the percentage gain is on that, from 1946 till today, but it's huge. But the other thing that I want to touch on the production expenses is, I think it's more on our end around the volatility. So managing volatility is as important as managing costs, and they go hand in hand. Fertilizer has its ups and downs. Mainly seeds a little bit more forgiving and increasing, chemical the same. We find what's important now, and this goes back to the story of cost of production. If you have an estimated, yield target that you're going to achieve for a certain crop, and you kind of know where your labor power machinery is going to be projected at, and you can start locking in some of those input products in advance, like even buying fertilizer today for next year's crop, or fuel or whatever. It is a little bit hedging and no one can predict, but if you can do that in a way that you're essentially making a plan, a strategic plan to guarantee that you'll have a margin, that includes selling the crop at a certain margin, then why not? And it's hard. I think farmers are risk takers, and the number of decisions they have to make and the risks. But if you just hold on and roll the dice and hope that the markets go up and the costs go down, you might get lucky, and that might happen, and you're going to rake in a lot. But it's those years where that's not happening that you simply just need to even that volatility out by planning ahead. So Eric's team and our team would work hand in hand. Like we start building our crop plans from a nutrient need standpoint really come August. We'll know what's left over. We'll know what they need for next year. And then, we can come in and meet with the guy and say, yeah, you should pre-book this because that's a good price and there's a good chance you'll have margin to make. So I think managing volatility is as important as managing price. That's clearly not going to go away with all that's going on in more of a global market.
I think that's a really good point, Warren, is looking at not only what the cost of production is to start with, but also where you're going to lock in your prices and know where that break-even point that you actually do have some profitability and margin. So how does looking at like your overall crop rotation and impact that, and what costs are often overlooked? We are always wondering where are farmers spending that it adds a lot of value, and where are the risks that add to that?
I can take this one first because rotation is it's always a fun conversation from an agronomy standpoint. If money wasn't an issue and prices weren't an issue, we'd have a nice, diverse, balanced, healthy crop rotation because that ultimately is what's best for soil, for the health, for disease management, weed management, rotation of chemicals. Unfortunately, that's not the most profitable always. And so the temptation to grow, I'll use canola, canola is there. It's high because sometimes that has been the only profitable crop on a farm. But agronomically, we run into big issues doing that. We run into resistant weeds. We run into clubroot. We run into the list goes on. And so I think diversity of crop rotation in Canada is actually one of the more diverse countries in terms of its overall rotation. We've got some really good growing regions that can support a lot. Our disadvantage is very tight growing season, so we have to make these decisions and these plans up front. So we don't have the luxury of time. We have a very short growing season. But what can happen, I think, with a good crop rotation and a good agronomy plan is now we're talking about risk reduction. So you do reduce the risk of things that are going to cause you problems 5 years down the road that it's easy to forget about. Weed resistance to chemical it's huge right now. It's on the rise, and we got to be careful. There's not as many new active ingredients coming to market that can fix these problems. And I'm definitely not the first to say that we won't spray our way to getting rid of weed resistance. So adopting some of these other cropping systems allow you to rotate those chemicals. I think from a cost standpoint, one of the hardest recommendations that an agronomist will ever make is telling a farm to not do something, because that is about risk. So if I have to go to a farm and say, you do not need to spray for flea beetles, you do not need to spray for cutworms, you don't need to spray for wild oats, those are those decisions that in 30 days, it's going to be pretty obvious. And so although we make these recommendations, we're not doing it from a gut feel. We are using, scientific approach and a threshold and those sorts of things. But just to tell a farm not to do something is as big as trying to find savings, because some of these applications are $20, $30, $40 an acre. And I think they're used to, it's not fair. They're not used to doing it. It's easy to do it because then you've got peace of mind and insurance that you're protected, but you might not make any money. And so it's super important. It's hard to do. It's even hard for a farm. It's not just about the agro. It's hard for a farm not to do something. But yeah, we try to deploy all the science and the methods and experience to make those calls in season, use the right judgment. Sometimes we get them right. Sometimes we miss a couple, and that's part of the learning. Our iterative cycle is one season a year in Canada. We also don't have the luxury of time to plant another crop. So those are some things we think about from an agronomy standpoint. We talk about our input costs and decisions.
Those are good points, Warren. I know it's funny because I can walk into my neighbor's field and tell them exactly what they should or shouldn't do. And then I walk into my own and I can't, because it keeps you up at night, right? You're stressed about it. It's your overall income. And so it's nice to have that trusted advisor. And I think that's a really important tool in order to making decisions is to have the experts and somebody else helping you making those decisions and be able to have different experiences, because we only do this once every year. So it's important to have those people around you. Eric, do you have anything else you'd like to add about, overlooked costs and...
Well, I think there's the only thing I could, like, we don't speak a lot on my side. We kind of understand our lane. We don't talk a lot about crop rotation, but I can say this is that, like, farming is a battle. Like, it's a war over a lot of years. So, we would encourage clients to make sure they make good decisions that are going to be for their long-term impact. And like Warren said, we've seen short-term stuff bite you. And that trusted advisor piece, really, I think it's more and more important for our clients to start, like lots of clients rely on us or Warren's group, but having someone out there to work with, because it's a pretty lonely business at the end of the day, right? Like I grew up on a farm, and my father had his best friends were our neighbors, and they would chat about what they were doing, but they didn't get really into it, because ultimately when that quarter came up next to them, they were going to bid against each other, right? And it was a friendly rivalry, but like, if I have secret sauce, I'm not going to tell you what mine is. So it's a bit of a lonely, and they're a little more, when you think of a farmer, you think of a stoic figure out there kind of battling the nature. So having people that they can rely on, and I go back to the benchmark piece, right? Having that benchmark, understanding where you fit in against your neighbors without having to say, this is my neighbor, helps you understand where you can improve going forward.
I think that's what's really exciting about the MMP cost of production study, and is because it does summarize a lot of that data. And there's a lot of different places we can go for resources now that have cost of production information and tools. And there's a lot more experts out there that you can team up with and work with in order to look at some of these things, because it used to be we could grow a big crop or a small crop and we would still make it. But with the way that the costs are now, it's just not that way anymore. So do you have any advice or tools or resources that you would recommend for farmers, or even a strategy just to get started with farm management planning and agronomy planning?
I'll do a little bit is, again, I think, of course, and I'll say this, Amy, I've been with M&P so long, I probably talk like an accountant now, not like an Aggie. Really knowing those costs, production, and understanding where you fit in, the benchmark, whether you can get it. Sometimes you get that from your banker, right? Go to your bank and say, hey, well, how are things? How am I doing? But understanding those costs against your neighbors is really important, because, again, it is a low cost business, and you're not competing with your neighbor, but you're competing with your neighbor, because unfortunately, the ones that have the highest costs might not be in business, especially when we start looking at all this. We're moving out of a period in agriculture where on the grain side, it was, we had some really good profits, and we're seeing margins tighten. So you got to really start looking at those bottom lines, and it's not just put the crop in and you're going to make money, like you said. It's going to be more the ones that really know how to manage that piece of it. So we want our clients to have the right tools to make those decisions and not have them made for them, right? They don't want to be sitting around going like, what happened, right? We want them making stuff happen, not just saying, hey, what happened? Or how did I end up here? So it's important for them to have the right tools in their belt to be able to do that.
Super, super easy answer from my standpoint. I'll be bold enough to say that if you're not taking a soil test on your farm and using that soil test to make a decision on fertilizing, you won't be farming in 5 years. So and maybe my timeline's wrong, but it's as crystal ball-y as I'll get. Been in the industry for 20 years trying to help farms grow crops, and it's still kind of sad that the agronomy version of the balance sheet is the soil test. And there's still farms that are not putting that as a value and focusing that effort to help them make one of the most costly decisions they have to make, which is how to grow and care and fertilize. So this is not a sales pitch on anything. It's more like genuine need to understand soil testing. The labs have been around for decades, and I can't imagine spending the money that they have to spend without actually knowing what's left over and what's there and what they need. And simply fertilizing based on crop removal is also a moving target, and it doesn't work. And so it's super important that we start to prioritize the needs up front of what that crop is going to need to grow. It has a cost component. And I guess my answer is the simplest way to get started learning is is to take a soil test. And there's a progression that's happening, and someone might be listening saying, oh, well, I hear this a lot, but more than I soil test. And I say, congratulations, fantastic. Tell me more. And I think, Amy, this leads into that progression of management style and mindset that we have, to where we probably need to be measuring in the lowest common denominator of some of these decisions, to also be around in 5 years. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, but less than half of the market takes a soil test today. So that means half of the market is just throwing money in the ground, hoping.
I think it's a good point. And I think the one thing to understand about a soil test is they're never exact, but if you take them year over year on your farm, it gives you your trend. Is my potassium increasing or is it decreasing? Is my phosphate increasing or decreasing? How are my management decisions impacting that ground? And it helps you also make decisions of, do you take a remediation approach, or do you take maybe I'll grow oats instead of something that's needs a bigger production because of the capability of that land. I think it's a really important just to start with the basic. And I think it's comes down to, when we're talking about farm management, talking about planning, and we're talking about agronomy, is talking about making good decisions so we can make good buying decisions and good decisions on the farm, so we're not erasing that margin that we plan for. And so I think those are both really good points. Can you just talk a little bit about why it's important to understand gross production and gross margin?
When we start looking at, like, when we start gross production or gross income is what we would look at. We look at last year, 2025, and it was a bounce back year for a bunch of our clients because they grew monster crops. We had really good yields last year, which kind of offset the last 2 years of trending, right? Our prices were going down. Clients grew a big crop. They felt better. Like most farmers, this is what we've seen over the years. Even in a down year, if they grow a big crop, they feel better about themselves, because that's really what they're in the business to do. And farmers like to grow big crops, but it's important to understand what that is. And then the gross margin piece is really back to Warren's side is, what are those production expenses to get the most out of that crop? And, understanding those two numbers really helps a client to come up with, what is my net? Lots of times when we do, and just to flip it around, we do planning with clients. We actually take all their expenses. We start off with all their fixed expenses and then say, this is what you have to produce for a gross margin. And then Warren's team will say, well, this is what, based on your gross margin, like based on your production expenses, this is what those are. So now this is your target income, gross income. Clients can do a few things with that. They can actually lock in prices when they understand that, because they can start making active decisions. Warren said something about, you can't just hope. Hope is not a strategy. We want our clients making active decisions, and having that information allows them to actively do it. And it's most clients, when they lock in a price for canola, there's a portion of them that hope the price drops to justify the decision, right? We would say, let's hope it goes up and you get a higher price for the rest of it. But what we like to see is them making good decisions with good information. Otherwise, you're just kind of like, well, it feels this way or it feels that way. And that's not a great way to make decisions. And with the information we have out there now, you should be able to have enough information to help support your decisions.
Not much to add on top. I think those are the exact points. And I think it's where at the farm gross margin is understood, because there's different levels that you could understand that the starting point would be just at the farm level. But yeah, it's a healthy discussion. And, this is not complicated stuff for us and with our clients, and all these terms and these things we're throwing around might seem new. It's like, doesn't matter. It's not going to rain. It's not actually that difficult or cumbersome, and our job is to take the effort off the farm by having to do this. So anyways, yeah.
Awesome. Well, you guys have provided us a lot of information today, and from both different perspectives, from the farm management planning to the agronomic. For the listeners, what would be a takeaway that you think starting today? What steps should they be taking, and what are maybe some resources that are out there for them? What's some key takeaways today that you want our listeners to walk away with?
I wouldn't mind going first on this, because I want to go just one step further in this mindset. comment. So what we're finding is this evolution, Amy, on the mindset that farms are taking to make any decisions, agronomic, financial, logistics, you name it. And so when I found that $3,800 cockshut combine from 1946 on my grandpa's farm, he was thinking about his farm and he made farm level decisions. As he got more crops and more knowledge and more understanding, he would probably move up in thinking about making different decisions by crop type, right? So this is what I do for my canola, and this is what I do for my wheat, and whether it's a seeding rate or a chemical plan, and we still do that today. Like hopefully no one's using 3417 across the whole farm, but hopefully they've got a blend for their canola and a blend for their wheat. Where it starts to get fun from my standpoint and Eric's standpoint, but also super valuable is when we move into the field level decisions. So everything that we've just talked about today can be done at a field level. We have the data, we have the people, we have the tools, all the measures. So we can do gross margin at a field level. I can do yield targets and yield by field. And then you really, if you can, step back and put yourself in your farm office, you're looking at your farm map with all your fields colored and the pins in them, then you start to see which fields are actually making money or not. And imagine that conversation at the start of the year when you've seen that red pin has not moved for 3 years and you just why are you going to that field to lose money? And so there might be ways to correct that. And that's also where we come in. We don't need to go too far in, but we do have a lot of our clients as well at the zone level of farming. So this is a sub-field level where we're deploying more technology, more automation, more prescriptive programming, as well as the costs that fluctuate across a field by zone. And then you're talking about zone level gross margin, zone level fertility planning, and man, the list just goes on. There will be a point, we're seeing it in other industries, even in Canada and some of our viticulture and orchards, there is plant level precision coming. When are we going to get there for broad acre crops like wheat and canola? Sooner than we think. I've been involved in some startups that are working on, sensor tech where we will know the health and the potential of that wheat crop and that canola crop. We're already doing it in corn with singulation and tracking that. So it was a long, what is the takeaway? But my ask is that all this really good knowledge and an understanding of gross margin and cost of production, we also now overlay, where's our mindset? Farm, crop, field, zone, or plant. And you can be across that spectrum, but moving guys into that is super fun. So
awesome.
I'll end with that.
Okay. Eric?
Well, my piece is, and I get to do the boring side of the business is to understand those other fixed costs. And when we're just rolling out the field side of the gross margin, but when we layer in those other expenses, it becomes really apparent which fields are not making you money. And then what are you going to do differently with it, right? Because that's really the goal is to have a farmer grow a good crop and be successful. That's really what we want. And I think that's what usually their goals are going in. The other takeaway, I think, is just always be looking for information that helps you make decisions. I said it earlier, hope's not a strategy. And you're going to make decisions that don't work. Sometimes you're going to lock in something that's going to move against you, but at least you made a decision and it didn't just happen to you. And that's really what for my 38 years in the business, successful farms are decisive people that make decisions. And I hopefully your listeners are doing that.
All right. Thank you, Eric and Warren from MMP, for joining us today. It's been a very insightful conversation. I appreciate both of you taking the time to talk about not only just the farm management planning, but also the agronomic strategies on the farm to be profitable. And for our listeners, thanks for tuning in this week. If you want to check out more, please tune in to Nutrien-eKonomics.com.
Farming isn't farming without questions, and now there's a place to go for answers. At eKonomics, an entire team of agronomists are ready and waiting to help for free. No question is too big or too small. Visit Nutrien-economics.com and submit your question with the Ask an Agronomist feature.
Is phosphorus mobile in the soil? And how is phosphorus lost?
Generally, we don't think of phosphorus as being mobile in the soil. Phosphorus is quite immobile, actually. It doesn't move very far at all in most circumstances. That has important relevance to the plant's ability to extract phosphorus from the soil, how fertilizer phosphorus might be supplied to the plant, and also impacts the environmental effects of phosphorus that might be lost. Phosphorus is not mobile in the soil because it gets bound quite tightly to solids. The clay particles gets tied up in organic matter, reactions with other minerals that make it very immobile in the soil. So the way phosphorus might be lost would be by erosion. If the solid soil particles are being removed from the field by running water or wind, then the phosphorus that's attached to those particles gets removed as well. So erosion is one of our concerns about losses. Now, another way phosphorus might be lost is if we have soluble phosphate. So yes, some portion of the phosphorus in the soil can remain soluble. And if we have runoff from the field, some of that soluble phosphorus can be removed in that runoff, particularly if we've just applied fertilizer and it's sitting on the surface, hasn't yet become attached to the soil, and we have a rainfall event where we have runoff occurring or excess irrigation, and we have water running off of that field, then those soluble forms, like fertilizer that's just been applied, can be removed from the field, and that loss we would call runoff.
If you liked what you heard today, share this podcast with someone who would enjoy it. Your neighbor, a friend, or your crop advisor. Your support helps us keep these conversations going. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a rating wherever you listen.